So, hi everyone, and welcome to Coaching Call 10, Sustaining Your Improvement Efforts. The collaborative may transition, but collaboration and learning do not. My name is Rana Jalnabi, and I will be the moderator for this webinar, and we have Clemens Steinbock speaking to us today. Please familiarize yourself with the control panel you have to your right. You can ask questions, you can type them in, or you can wave your hand and I will unmute you and you can ask your questions. I'll keep everyone muted for now to avoid any background noise, but feel free to let us know when you have a question or you need to speak to us. Clemens, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Wonderful. So welcome everybody. I am Clemens Steinbock. I am the director here for the Center for Quality Improvement Innovation. And we work here mostly in the US, but I am really proud and humbled to be a consultant for the Boost Collaborative. And the topic of today is really about sustainability. And because I think as we all think a little bit ahead about what happens after the collaborative, I want to share some of those experiences and talk a little bit more about that. What I would like to start out with, if all of you could put in your name and your organization in the chat room, and if you can be sent to the organizer and panelists, I think that would be great, or to myself, so I can actually see who we have today. Do you mind, I think we have about 5 people, do you mind, or 6, do you mind, Rana, if you can unmute our lines and just do this verbally? Maybe we can do a quick round of introductions. I think you're still unmuted.
Okay, unmuting everyone. Second. Okay. Great.
Can we do a quick round of introduction? If you can just speak up quickly and just your first, last name, and maybe you want to add a little bit why you wanted to join this webinar to make it a little bit more personal in terms of the topic. Who wants to go first?
Valeria, would you like to go first? Okay. So
you may be muted.
Yeah. So let's start with Michelle. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So I'm Michelle. I am the intake and harm reduction worker at South Mental Health and Substance Use. I work with both the OAT team as well as our counseling team, and I am on the South Boost committee. So that's why I'm here.
Great.
Wonderful. Good to have you.
Amir.
Hi, so my name is Amir. Amir Wakhtal. I'm with Vancouver Native Health, and I'm on the Vancouver Native Health Boost Committee as well. And yeah, that's why I'm here too, just to kind of hear what other teams are doing and learn from other people, and yeah, share what we're doing.
Great. Yeah, we have Cole and Valeria on the line as well. I'm not sure if they can hear us.
So let's get the ball rolling. If you get more people on the line, then we can certainly stop, take some intake. Sure. What I want to do next is I wanted to plan out a little bit with the agenda to talk a little bit about setting the stage. Particularly, I've been involved in many work collaboratives, and I want to share one report that we did and to really reflect back about what were the lessons learned, particularly when we interviewed them 6 months or 12 months after the collaborative and what happened, and to think that through a little bit together. I want to give a little bit of an overview about spreading and holding gains and the diffusion of innovation, like a little bit of a knowledge gain about those 2 topics as they relate to sustainability. And then I want to introduce a little bit about a sustainability framework and maybe start to think a little bit ahead about how can you and your program and your improvement efforts be sustained. And hopefully we have tons of questions and answers. And I have a couple of questions for you throughout the collaborative. In terms of welcome introduction, just very quickly, it's really about how we can plan ahead that the improvements that you have made are not evaporating at the end of this collaborative. And secondly, how can you not only sustain your improvements, but even make further improvements? And I think we want to do this together and maybe brainstorm a couple of options that are available to you. And so this will be rather interactive. So Michelle and Amir, we're looking forward to hear from you. So the first one is, and this is maybe we can hear from Michelle and Amir, what activities of the collaborative, and here is a few listed, do you or your program wish to continue as the improvement initiative transitions? And if you can tell us a bit why and why not. So are you thinking of continuing with performance measurement? Why not? Are you thinking of continuing your improvement interventions, the reporting internally, for instance, or any other networking across programs? I would love to hear from you. Michelle, can I put you a little bit on the spot? And if you haven't thought that through all the way, that's certainly fine as well.
Sure. So at the moment, I think we've really ingrained all of our measures into the regular routine of our OAT team. So all the things that they're doing that we've implemented, we plan to continue to do because they are now the norm. So to keep those things going, and then outside of that, things like the spreadsheet that we get from the Boost team, sort of watching those numbers so that we can maintain not just making sure that we're still engaging with clients, but also to make sure that we're up to date on all of our quote paperwork, right? So make sure all our numbers are entered, make sure everything's up to date, because we know that our clients will could show up anywhere, and having the most current information in there is best. And we already collaborate with a lot of the other teams like Connections and the RAC team. So we'll maintain, as of starting new stuff, I'm not 100% sure what we'll be able to do aside from that, but I'm sure we're going to continue looking at how things are rolling and how we can improve things.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Amir, do you want to share a little bit your response to the question?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I think we would love to continue doing is we've started working closely with some pharmacies where they're actually updating us to our clients that go to them and updating us about their prescriptions ending that week or later even that day. And then we go and we've been making notes of that for each of the patients in the doctor's queues, so they can see that their prescriptions need to be extended to make sure that they don't run out of their medication. So that's something I think we'd love to continue doing. One of the things we're going to start doing that we actually haven't had a chance to even do yet is we're creating an e-form. So we're on a different EMR system. Sorry, it's a little noisy here. Let me move. We're working on a different EMR called Oscar, and we don't actually have an e-form for our opioid use disorder patients. So we're working to implement one of those, actually. We're just in the process of that, and hopefully it'll be done in the coming weeks.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. So I had the pleasure to actually, we conducted this is words and quotes from a post-collaborative assessment we have done. This is probably now a few years ago. So we asked the question, this was 6 months and 12 months after the collaborative actually ended, and asked them the question to an external evaluator: what do you think about sustainability? How can we help you? Did you sustain? Did you report the data? And whatnot. And I think I think this is a really important quote here. When the words end and sustain are used in the same sentence, they are at war with each other. Because I think an important reflection that often we have a start date and an end date for activities such as the collaborative. But sustaining is really a much more go beyond what you're already doing. And I think that what you just we heard from Michelle and Amir, they're thinking well beyond that. And I think that another quote that we got from this extensive interviews were really about that often for many collaborative participants, that the actual improvement journey actually begin at the time when the actual transition occurs, because now they really have all the data systems in place, they have all the team, they created the necessary momentum, and actually at that point is really going, that's often where the actual improvement actually starts. Here are some other lessons learned, and or some from those interviews that we conducted. And here are some lessons learned, and I will share 2 slides of those. One is, I think it helped programs just generally based on this one specific collaborative to actually have a written sustainability plan. Like, how do we describe our activities going forward? And it was not only internally, but also to the management of a program and beyond to what we are trying to do going. Because often there's a lot of writing requirements about expectations for the collaborative, but I think we want to extend that. The next one is that there was really a plan in place to really collect data, not only to collect data, but to actually have an active process in place to look at the data and take the subsequent actions based on the results. So as we all know, the measurement alone is not quality improvement. So the question is, what are you going to do with the data once you have it? I think it also was important to have this venue to really maintain interest and to share interventions. So I think the integration into staff meetings and highlights was really an important one for many, and to really make that part, and that could be part of the staff meetings that you have, that could be part of integrating into other meetings, board meetings and other things to give routine updates too. I think it's worth saying that to really engage the staff members in the continued efforts of a quality improvement project, and to routinely survey the clients and the staff about what they want to do. So I think it often provides an opportunity transitioning from the collaborative to figure out what's most relevant to us and to focus that. The only way you know that is by listening very carefully to the staff needs. So here are some other maybe best practices. I think to make your aim statement that you probably wrote at the very beginning of the collaborative, and to really take another look at this and really keep it in the interest of the staff. Since early on you may wrote one aim statement that's very relevant for the collaborative, but to really write one now that's really interest of the staff and the clients. To really set up a meeting schedule that's really planned out for, let's say now for 2019. So rather than thinking, oh, we're going to meet one more time in December after the next learning session, to really plan this out even further. Let's say monthly is too often, but maybe every other month seems realistic, and then really schedule it out already. I think quality improvement is a contact sport, so to maintain the relationships, and that was not only within the program that you have, but also with others. So if there is a few, and Amir mentioned already several other programs they want to work very closely with, but just to put that into a more structured process, how often can we meet? Can they, for instance, participate in our quality improvement meetings every other month where we want to further discuss our improvements being made? So let's talk a little bit more. I'll come back to some other suggestions later, but let's talk a little bit about spreading and holding gains for your improvements. And I think this is usually the model that is most likely being proposed. So I make an improvement, then I'm thinking about how I can hold the gains by systematizing and integrating it, and then I will sustain. But I think more likely, the model that you will have is one where they're much more overlapping. And I think that when you do an improvement, you're already thinking about how can I sustain and even further systematize the improvements. And rather than having it a subsequent, to really have an overlapping approach. In that vein, I think that the old thinking about holding the gains is really about, we made a change, which is basically we did it, so therefore suggesting that there's an end point to it. That you're really thinking about the gains only afterwards. But I think, and you're thinking about the implementation on sustainability is really to be much more proactive and to introduce the word sustainability, thinking ahead, and systemization very early. And so I think at the learning session that's coming up, I think we have the opportunity to start that process, but hopefully that will go on for a long time. And because I think at the end of the day, improvements are to be made and sustained. So usually when we think about sustainability, it's usually the word resistance comes up right away. So, and I think you may have seen this slide before, but I think it's very important notion that whenever you introduce change or systemization of changes, that you will face some kind of resistance. And it's either a form of a denial of, no, we don't have to do this anymore because the collaborative is over. Why do we have to do this? Because the collaborative is over. To really have much more the kind of Kubler-Ross stages of grief in terms of denial, anger, bargaining, and over depression for the acceptance. And I think we all go through that on a personal level. So as a leader, it's often the question, I think that's really an important topic to be covered when we talk about sustainability, is about how you as a leader can really manage resistance. And I think that the first viewpoint that is really important is that resistance is part of a normal process to really, because at the end of the day, you are changing the status quo. Particularly when it becomes systemization, where you change job descriptions, you make them much more an integrated part, that you need to be understanding when you do so, that it will cause the individuals and others, including yourself, to react a little bit with kind of coping, and it's certainly shown differently for different personalities. As a leader, I think you need to be recognizing that's a normal process of learning. And I've, long time ago, often took the position that not to take the resistance if shown personally, but to really be sure that to really address it at the time. So if your first meeting in January comes around and somebody says, so why don't we have to do this anymore? The collaborative is over. To really take an active step as a way to look into this and address it right there, and not to take it personally. You worked so hard on the collaborative, why is not everybody else on board? Another important slide for me is always is the following, and if you see it on the screen, it's about how to deal with complex change. And the question is always that in the ideal world, a sustained change has not only a vision going forward, the necessary skill by staff, everybody understands the benefit for doing so, has the resources, but also an action plan. But often when you deal with systems and change, often one part of those 5 items are missing. And so I actually learned to look at here, I don't know if you see you don't see that, but my mouse, basically, if I look at, if a group is confused, if you look at the right side here, the second term down, then I know if people are confused, they're maybe not understanding fully what the vision is to go forward. So if the first meeting is like, I'm not really sure what you want me to do, that's maybe a reflection of that the staff is not aware of the vision going forward. And then you can go down. So I memorized the slide now. So if I go in a group and I have to facilitate, and I go in there and I see like a little bit of anxiety, or I see some frustrations or false starts, I know with this slide where to start and start dialogue around those.
Clemens, do you mind if I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Yes. So some people are interested, they want to put in the hard work and continue putting in the hard work, but they're burnt out and they're overwhelmed with the amount of work they have to do. So would you consider that as frustration or as resistance? And as a leader, how do you go about that?
I think burnout is probably another form of resistance, but I think burnout is probably in a larger context of I call it joy in work. So the question is, how can we enjoy the work that we do? And often when you're burned out because you work many hours and often you don't see necessarily how it relates to. So I think it may be about this, but I think it would be a great topic in the future to really look at the joy in work and what can we do to make our work while we are busy and while we often don't see the end goal and the horizon of how much impact we actually do, but to look at how we can increase the meaningfulness of our work and make it really part of our daily going to work.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Rana, any other questions that come in, or Amir, Michelle, do you have any questions so far?
No, I'm good.
We have Dirk online as well, so we're keeping this very interactive, so please feel free to join us whenever you want.
Amir, any questions before I go on to the next item? I have one question after the next segment that I would like to get your input. No response means Amir's doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed that. What were you asking? Sorry.
No, sorry. Do you have any question at this point?
Oh no, I'm good for now. Sorry about that.
Okay. No worries. So the next item that I think is always worth pointing out with spreading is also about to think about how can we spread an innovation. So you come up with one innovation, you worked really hard on one intervention. How can you really make that part of every day's work by everybody? Or you have, let's say you have two programs and one program has done the innovation but the other one hasn't. How can you spread that? And I think some of you may know The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, really the understanding that at what point, so if I have 10 programs, how many programs do I have to convince that this is the right work before it takes off? And his book was really informed about Everett Rogers' book. He's a professor in New Mexico. And the diffusion of innovation, a wonderful read. I think this is now the 4th edition or 5th edition. So it's a wonderful read. It may be a little bit older by now, but I think it's a wonderful book and has a lot of wonderful examples in there that really highlight some of those ideas about how can we let others know what we do and therefore spread the gospel. The essence of the diffusion curve is that you need about 10 to 20% to really adopt an idea before the diffusion process takes off. And something that is, and I will show you a slide how that works out. So we were engaged. This is an uptake of the chronic care models among programs that we worked with. This was a collaborative going back about 10 years ago that we worked with the IHI. And so you can see here that at a certain point, just now 10 to 20%, that the ideas that you have will take off. So obviously there's a good thing that basically that more people are adopting your ideas. But I think it's also that once that it takes off, it's sometimes very hard to change what's currently in place. So because those that communicate the change are not necessarily centrally anymore because it gets decentralized. Some of you may have seen this, but this is really an important understanding about spreading and diffusing ideas, that only a small percentage of us, so that's 2.5%, will take an idea and just run it just because they think it's a great idea and just do it. The early adopters are those that are local opinion leaders, those that really carry a certain message. And it may not be Rana, myself, or Cole who are the early adopters. They are much more locally. Those are those that speak up at meetings, those that have a certain cloud within the community. The important part here is that the early majority, so that's about 30%, they won't listen anymore to the content leaders. They will rather listen to the early adopters, so the local leaders, for their input, and that's a really important part. The late majority is those that basically are local, and they even look even closer. If the program across the street are doing that intervention, we will do so. They won't listen to anybody else. They will do so by their forces. And as always, there's always a certain portion of those that are, they will not be convinced unless their survival is at stake. So here are some just very simplistically, but some attributes to each of those groups. And so particularly when you think about, and just to summarize and bring this to a close, is that don't think about compliance by all at the very beginning of your spreading process, because it won't work. Because if I want to convince everybody with one speech, I will only reach a certain percentage, because the vast majority, 60%, if not more, they will only be if somebody else, like if me or Michelle will speak up, because they will carry more voice than I would in a local context. So I'm going to stop here. Any questions or comments so far? Okay, so now I have a question for you. And that's the question that I want to hear from you, and maybe Michelle, I can get started with you. It's about what systemic barriers do you face, or do you anticipate to face, to sustain your improvements that you have made so far? So think about, it's January, February, it's April, it's the summer of 2019. What systematic barriers do you think you will face to sustain all the efforts that you have done so far?
Well, we, like I said, have been pretty proactive of integrating our changes straight into the daily routine for our system. It's really going to come down to volume, so and staffing. So if volume increases, responsibilities increase, if we were to implement more changes, then that's what it would come down. That's where we would have a barrier. It's really all about time and the number of clients that we try to see in a day to do what we want to do.
Okay. Armia, can I ask you to share a little bit what barriers you think you will face going forward?
Yeah, sure. I think that I think we're gonna have to deal with a little bit of like burnout is one of the things I imagine we're gonna have to deal with. One of the things that is a barrier, it's not so much for sustaining the improvement, but it is a barrier that I think we're going to face, is actually implementing some of the changes we still want to do. We're still lacking a little bit of resources. So like I said, we're still working on that form to actually get it done. But I think the major one is just going to be a little bit of burnout, a little bit of resistance to keep going after the collaborative's been finished. But everything that's in place so far, I don't see too much barriers towards actually keeping the process going.
Okay. Just keep in mind, Amir, that the collaborative may transition, but the improvement work doesn't end. And I think it's really important when we communicate with others around that, because often that the staff
for sure
that we work with often listen to like, oh, it ends, so we don't have to do anything anymore. But I think the obligation to really look at the data, to do a quality improvement project going forward, I think that's something that doesn't go away. At the end of the day, our patients deserve the best care possible, and that also means to improve on a daily basis what we can do differently to serve their needs better every day.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's why here at South we really worked at putting them into the workflow, so that, I mean, it was inevitable. The collaborative is going to come to an end. It can't go on forever. But if there was real benefit from the stuff that we did, and it didn't just benefit us, but also benefited the clients, then, it making it what was sort of expected as a job duty as opposed to just linked to the collaborative, I think has been the main thing to keep things going. So yeah, and again, just to echo Amir, I mean, burnout I think is a big thing, just because, you know, not, you know, with the collaborative, like the collaborative stuff, like these meetings, the day meetings, all that sort of stuff is sort of done off all of our sides of our desks, that you know, we're already doing our full job plus this. And I think actually it might actually be easier for the team once the collaborative does quote end, not because we're going to end what we're doing, but because we'll be able to really look at what we're doing and not have to, you know, meet as often about, I mean, we have it in our regular staff meetings about Boost and what's going on, and like, how are things going, and, you know, is there something that we think we should implement or try. But I think that once it's the outside obligations are done, I think it might be a little easier for our team to focus more on new implementations and how to sustain those.
I was on mute here. I noticed that a couple of other folks joined us. If you can quickly introduce yourself, that would be appreciated. And maybe if you can chime in and let us know about the barriers that you potentially face for sustaining your improvement efforts.
Derek online?
So definitely it's more of an aspect of family.
Derek, can you hear us?
Yes, and that's why I want to use so that you can listen to some equipment.
So Rhonda, I think, well, is there anybody else? Otherwise, I just keep going with the slides, yeah. And then we maybe circle back.
We have Derek online, but I'll keep you unmuted.
Okay. Maybe you can mute his line. That would be appreciated.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about a sustainability framework. So what are the 5 drivers for sustainability? And I want to think that through a little bit with you, not only to help you to shape it, but also in preparation for our learning session. I would love to hear what you have to say. So I think that the 5 drivers to really are, and Michelle mentioned several, and Amir mentioned several of them already, but there are 5 drivers, and let's talk about each of them a little bit more, because at the end of the day, I want you to create an action plan where that all of us leave the last learning session not only with the understanding of like the accomplishments that we all did, but also with an action plan going forward. So let's talk about the first driver, which is communication. I think it's going to be really important to maintain and sustain that kind of flow of what's going on throughout the organization and beyond. And I think that for some, and maybe that comes back to the burnout or the fact like is to really make the case of why change and improvement is necessary. And I think that can be done in a very simple way by just articulating it or show numbers. Some people are more convinced by numbers and tables, and some others are more convinced by storytelling. Often when I go to a program, I bring the data, but then also highlight one story of one client, when I worked in programs where we failed to serve that one client and what we can learn from that and really make the case for it. I think there's often a tendency after working really hard for a project that everything is fine and everything works well, but to really make a case for the continued improvements. And also it comes back also with the vision part we talked earlier about, comes back to when the groups or the staff is confused, is to talk about and demonstrate the benefits. What are we in for? Why are we continuing the collaborative efforts well beyond December 6th? And what are we benefiting from? And I think there could be a whole litany of benefits should be listed here. And that you need to be convinced of the benefits, but also to convince others of doing so. Describe the changes. And I think to the next item here is about find the right messengers. And I think often that when I do presentations and I try to have other people speak up because they are often better messages than you are. You can provide a bigger picture, but what change has been made? Maybe the one person, the one staff person who was really intimately involved in the change should speak up and give them the floor, not only recognizing the championship for the improvement, but also the understanding about rewarding them for the incredible efforts they have done. Communication also around the senior leaders within an organization, and also to figure out like how you can reward. And when we think about awards, most people think immediately about a monetary award, but I think most people think about non-monetary awards that could be like a plaque. It could be a recognition. It could be a recognition among your peers in front of a staff or clients, and to really recognize them and to really communicate to others about how well you have done. Communication is also about sharing the improvements, and I think it's going to be important about sharing the results. And I still remember that I went to a program recently, and when you walked in their waiting room, they had this gigantic chart, and they basically said there, and this was a normal test that should be given to all clients, it was at 50%. So the goal was 100%, but they were at 50%, and they turned it around and said, can you help us? And it was interesting. They had flyers in the waiting room, and so ask your providers. And they turned it around, and they were very open about their storyboards about where they are and where they need to go. I think to really be sure that you communicate openly and transparently with everybody. Obviously, when I talk about communication, we often think about always in one-dimensional, like a staff meeting, but there's a lot of other things that you can think of in terms of channels of communication. I think we want to spread a little bit and figure out what along a different continuum, it may work well for one, but maybe we should think about other things. Maybe a handwritten note to the staff complimenting them about their efforts will be, for many, a very rewarding experience. So if you look at that, maybe it sparks some interest about that. Documentation, I think that Michelle mentioned earlier about the systemization. I think we have to think about that if the new status quo has to be integrated in job descriptions, in new staff orientations, in policies and procedures and flowcharts. And I think that's always easier said than done. Often it takes a long time to add certain things into job descriptions, but it's really worthwhile doing. Not only that quality improvement should be part of your job description, but also the relevant work should be part of your job description.
Can I just ask Michelle about the documentation? Michelle and Amir, how feasible is that? Even if it's not the job description, how feasible is adding that to your orientation and flowchart?
For us, it seems to have been very easy. We don't roll over a lot of staff in the team that's connected to Boost. So yeah, so that's been fairly simple. I take care of the documentation of the stats part of it. So I just do that as it comes in. So yeah, so it's really not an issue for us over here.
Perfect. Good to hear.
For us, the documentation is a little bit more, when it comes to stats, it's been quite a bit of issue. We're having quite a bit of a difficulty tracking data, but again, that's because we don't really have a proper e-form in place. So in the beginning of the collaborative, it was actually my job to kind of update all the different databases and manually input everything. And so stat-wise, it was just way too time-consuming. By the time I'd finished updating all the info, the stuff I had done a month ago was no longer relevant. Everything had changed. So we actually put all our documentation of stats on hold, and we're waiting for this new e-form. So we're hoping once that comes into place, then it'll be very easy for us as well to do. So for stats-wise, we've been having a little bit of difficulty with that. But like I said, we're hoping we're currently working to address that. So.
Great. Thank you.
Anybody else who wants to chime in here?
Derek, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep you muted to avoid the background noise, but please feel free to type.
Let's talk a little bit more about here. The third driver is measurement, and I think it's really important that we think through about how you can sustain it. I think Amir's point about the data system and the Oscar and how you want to move that and is really important. And I think what I've seen sometimes that programs decide to continue to measure, maybe not at the same frequency, but it's really important to figure out not only what measures and make a concentrated effort to think that through, but also who will do the work and what are you going to do with the data. And I think I've seen sometimes where they determine thresholds to revisit an indicator. Like if it hovers in a certain range, they wouldn't really touch it. But if it goes below, then they got to start thinking about and revisit that indicator and the improvement work that's related to that. So I'm skipping one slide here. The next one is here about education and training. And I think this is really part of, and I think seems pretty obvious, but to really include your new status quo in all kinds of trainings. And again, trainings is not just a 101 or a workshop, but 101 could be a case study. Education could be a training, could be a case study. It could be a integration in new orientations. So I think it's going to be, I think, a very critical aspect to think that through in employee trainings. And the last one before I want to stop and talk a little bit more about planning for your sustainability is about engaged leaderships. And it's not only leaders that are part of the collaborative, but also leaders within the organization who may be peripherally involved, and to really find a routine way to keep them updated what you're still how they can support the implemented improvement ideas, and to really allow them to hear firsthand. And often when you invite them, they often come, and I think to really make, for instance, a routine report to be able to senior leaders to update them what you have done, and to really assign that responsibility to somebody on the team to let them know and to inform them on an ongoing basis. So I'm gonna stop here a little bit. Any questions before we talk? And I have a few questions for you related to some of those drivers. Before I want to ask you a little bit how you were thinking of planning ahead for your own sustainability. But any question at this point? Okie doke. So I will have a few questions for you. So maybe you want to write down some of the things, and I would like to start with Michelle in a second, a little bit about some of the key drivers that I can think of, and maybe hear from you how you were thinking. And it's a lot of questions, so maybe you want to pick one or two and then respond to. So first is about performance measurement. I mean, how frequent do you want to continue to measure your data? Is it the same frequency that you have currently, or are you thinking of changing it? Do you know already who will review the submissions of data and generate the reports? And particularly, what are you going to do once you have the data? So those may be some key questions before regarding measurement. For your team infrastructure, I mean, how often will your team are going to meet going forward? Particularly, I mean, we heard from Michelle there isn't as much turnover, but how will you address if there's a staff turnover? And if you have a plan in place for sustainability, how often will you update it? And a couple more questions. So one is about improvement. And I think for me, it's always important about the answer into question, how will you link measurement results with improvement efforts? And particularly, will the aim statement change and how? And the last one is about capacity building. How will we continue to provide the QI capacity for staff, and who will lead those? So I'm gonna stop here, and would love to hear from you guys a little bit more about what you're thinking of, and I can go back and forth with the slides a little bit to help you with it. But Michelle, can I start with you?
Sure. So again, we meet, Boost is a standing item in our substance use team meeting. And we meet once a month, so it's always there. If there's nothing to talk about, there's nothing to talk about. If there's something to talk about, there's something to talk about. So, but it is a standing item so that we are always looking at it. For reporting, my manager and my supervisor do all the reportings, except for the one that we get from Boost itself, which I love, the one that's right off the OUD forms. So yeah, so it's really going to come down to for new cycles is really going to come down to how things, January and February, we all know that that's when it's going to pick up for intakes across the system. That's when it always picks up, New Year's resolutions and everything. So it'll be interesting to see how many of those stick around. So, but yeah, I don't think we're going to change too much, simply because the flow is working so well now that we're able to sustain it.
Do you think your reporting frequency will change?
I don't think so. Simply because we do meet every month, and so we report to each other every month anyway, unless there's like some anomalous flag that comes up that we need to deal with right away or whatever. But our reporting time frame has worked for us, so I'm very much a let's not reinvent the wheel, and if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Last question for you. Do you think that, do you think there would be a beneficial aspect to really re-look at what you want to work on, like to come up with an aim statement for the next year? So rather than just continuing what you're doing, to really think about what are our specific goals? And would that be helpful?
Once we reach a point on our current aim statement where we've sort of seen either a leveling out, or we've either met or leveled out, so or a dip, obviously. But if we see that we're not going to make this particular number for our aim statement, I think that's when we'll sit down and go, okay, so either how can we improve what we're doing to meet this aim, or maybe we have the wrong aim, and go from there. But I think until we reach the end of our cycle to really see where things sit, to give it that fair timeline before we change anything.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Amir, can I put you on the spot a little bit and to dive into a little bit more about the improved sustainability questions that are posed here?
Sounds good.
Was this Amir?
Yeah, sorry, the internet connection's not too great, so you're cutting out a little bit, but I can hear you now. Sorry, what were you saying?
Sorry for that. So the question is about the sustainability questions regarding performance measurement and team infrastructure. Do you have any other reflections about those questions being posed here?
Yeah, sure. So regarding the frequency of reporting, like data and stuff, once we get our OUD forms up, and we currently also have very little turnover with our team, so I think we'll continue doing that. It's continuing to work pretty well. As far as reviewing those submissions, I think it'll be, I think we'll probably have one person who, once we have those forms in place and we have data we can actually look at, we'll have one person that'll be responsible, maybe me, maybe somebody else in the team, to just take a look at that and bring forth any interesting numbers members to the whole group at team meetings so we can discuss it together. What else do we have here? That's based on the question of how we'll continue to meet, and we'll continue to, and then also regarding assessing our aim statement, I think Michelle's answer applies to us as well. We'll continue to see if we're plateauing or if we're starting to see a dip, or if, you know, once we see that there's a need to change it, then we'll do just that, and we'll discuss that as a group at those monthly meetings.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. I mean, sorry for the internet connection here, but so the last question I have for you is really to think a little bit broader about what asks do you have to ensure continuity of your improvement work going forward. So think in terms of asks not only from the faculty potentially, but also from your peers, and on your what's on your wish list, so to speak.
I guess from this side, it would be more about hardware and software, right? So just a system that was currently, because we're working on 2 systems, so it would be to have one system and a system that was stable. We have had some EMR crashing issues and stuff like that, so that would be the big thing. But yeah, nothing, I mean, who doesn't want better stuff at their work, right? But yeah, nothing huge. It's just, you know, make sure, for me anyway, it's workflow, and to make sure that that stays continuous, and the continuity in that is sustained.
Okay, fair. Amir, any other asks from faculty or from your peer teams across the collaborative? Any other asks?
Really similar. Improving the EMR and getting that e-form up. We're dying to get it up so we can start looking at some data relevant to, you know, our clinic. And then I guess as far as like our peers, just time would be the ideal. You know, like things are going to get really busy. Like Michelle was saying, in January it's going to get pretty crazy. So just to make sure that everyone still is, you know, has, if possible, has a little bit of time they can allot to it, it would be ideal.
Okay. So I want to thank you, and we have about a couple minutes left, so I just wanted to thank you, take the moment, and before I turn it over back to Rana, I don't know if you have any other announcement for the day, but I would love to hear a little bit. Do you have any aha moments, big moments, big or small, that was like you really in one take-home message from this session? Michelle, anything big or small? Any aha moments?
I don't know about aha, but just to know that, like, I always find it's nice to know that we're not the only ones out there that are maybe struggling with something, or to remember that there are other teams that are doing this that, you know, might have done what we were trying to do and have that information. And again, why reinvent the wheel when you can borrow one from a friend? So that's, to me, that's just to remember that even though this collaborative, the project is ending, the underlying driving system amongst the teams is not. So
love that. Yeah. Great. Amir, any other last minute aha moments?
Yeah, just to echo exactly what Michelle was saying, when you were talking about how dealing with burnout, remembering that the obligation to improve patient care is ongoing. That was, you know, it's important to remember that, and important to remind team members of that. That's kind of the main one, I guess, for me.
Great.
If I can just add, like for both Amir and Michelle, just always remember that you are all connected, and that's one thing that came up from this collaborative, that you are all a team, and you can always reach out to each other. You have the listserv, you have the learning sessions, so you can always connect with each other and share challenges. And just like Michelle said, you might not be the only one, and usually you are not the only one, and other people might have solutions, if I can say that.
Okay, Amir, give me a call if you need anything.
So I'm going to end.
Will do.
Turn it
You as
over
well,
back to
Michelle.
you. Okay. I'm going to turn it over back to you because I'm just mindful of we have about 2 minutes to go. Any announcement before we close?
Now that I just want to thank everyone. It was great to have you, Clemens. Great to have Michelle and Amir. Very interactive. We have a survey that will come your way in an hour. Please feel free to go in and take you 2 minutes. Let us know how you feel about this session. What else do you want to learn about? That's it from my side.
We are looking forward to see you on December 6th at the learning session. And if you want the slides or any other information, please let me know, and you can send an email to Rana, and she's certainly happy to send you the slides or any other information. If I can be of help to you, I'm happy to extend that to you guys. So.
Yes, I'll make sure I post the slides and the recordings on the website. I'll send the link to everyone.
Great.
Right?
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.